All
Okay,
right.
I'm Belinda McBride, and I see there are people here. I actually write romance, and I write in multiple genres. I also write het and bisexual as well as male. I write science fiction, fantasy, um, paranormal, anything that kind of hits my mood. I've been published since about 2008. Prior to that, I was a public health technician, and I did a lot of technical writing with things that are kind of relevant right at this moment. So that's me.
Nice. So I'm Olivia Wiley. I am co-writer on the Aces High, Joker's Wild book series, which is a fight in the year 2155 to bring democracy back to America, and America owned by corporations. And it is a series that's designed to evolve from cyberpunk into solarpunk as my heroes win their battles and start to improve things. Other than that, I am a trained horticulturist, jack of all trades, master of none, bisexual lady, bisexual, biracial, and all around city girl at this point. Do you want to go ahead?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm Alex Washoe. I usually just say that I write genre fiction. I published 2 Westerns.
Oh, fun.
I'm working on a science fiction time travel book right now, which I have been kind of thinking of as a queer version of Back to the Future. I'm non-binary, and I think that about covers it.
Awesome.
Not sure what else to add.
And I apologize, I couldn't see your name at first, Alex.
Yes.
So, sorry about that. Cody, your turn.
Sure. Hi, I'm Cody Sisco. I write speculative fiction. I have 2 alternate history cyberpunk novels out that focus on mental illness. And then my short fiction tends to be more like urban fantasy. And all of the stuff I write, I think of it as kind of dark, or at least responding to sort of my take on darkness. But like the novels, for some reason, have been categorized by libraries as utopian. And maybe I'll get into why later. But I've been thinking more about, as I plot out my next books and stories, like exactly what my take on that's going to be. Separately, I organize literary events and media production for a small company here in LA, and we do a lot of online events like this one.
Nice.
And I go by he, him, and queer, gay, yeah.
Ellis, do you exist? Does anyone else want to unmute themselves and give their introduction? Oh. Okay. Sorry, folks. I just read the chat, and Ellis is saying that they're the host, not part of the panel. Sorry. All right. So we were being asked if we had. So just a bit of housekeeping. First, there's a chat at the bottom of your screen that you can use to talk to each other and share recommendations. If you'd like to submit a question to the panel, please put it in the Q&A bar. We're more likely to see it there. We'll address audience questions in the second half of the panel, but feel free to write them as you think of them. Also, the organizers would like me to remind you that you can buy RSM merchandise at their Redbubble merch store. All proceeds from that will go to the Trevor Project, which is our charity for the year. All right, housekeeping.
Great charity.
Done. Yep.
Yeah.
It's a good one. I am actually in the back of each of my books, because I, like Cody, I deal with mental health issues in my books. I want somebody to be able to flip to the end of the book and go, I want to get help like that, and then find resources right there. Trevor Project is at the top of both lists for book 1 and book 2. It moves down a little further in some of the later books, but it's one that I always encourage people to check out. So let's talk about hopeful books and hopeful arcs. I'd love to hear what you guys are looking for right now, because let's just say reality is stealing all the dystopian plots. So what do you guys look for when people talk about utopian fiction? What's your reaction, and what do you look for in terms of hopeful arcs?
Well, we're talking more dystopian, aren't we?
No, this is what could go right.
Well, I know, but I think there was dystopian in the title line, so I was kind of looking at that. But we can switch over to utopian.
Yeah, this is so when I suggested the panel, it's what could go right. How hopeful dystopia is fine, but like stories with hopeful arcs, in my opinion, I'm just going to throw this out there to get us going. There's no such thing as utopian, because utopia is like writing about heaven. Even Dante couldn't pull it off. It's boring. Yeah. But hopeful stories, positive change stories, improvement stories, those stories we can tell, and I think we kind of have to right now, because unless we can imagine what can get better, we can't start to make it happen. And I feel like a lot of the failures right now are failures of imagination. We can't picture a better world, so how can we make it happen? So I wanted to use this time to start brainstorming books that show us better futures, more hopeful futures, and encouraging futures, whether that be futures where we don't have bigotry, or futures where we figured out some of the climate change problems or how to cope with them better, stuff like that. If you look at the document that I've put up, that was something I built up over doing this panel, let's see, 4 times now in local events. And I always ask people, please throw in recommendations. Just get into the document. It's open, and type stuff in. So what do you guys look for when you just need some hope?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this over the past week, as I knew the panel was coming up. And one of the things I'm enjoying in stories is a de-emphasis of conflict and an emphasis on relationships, and how people enter into relationships and work through problems that aren't necessarily about the kinds of conflicts we've seen or are seeing now. And one good example, I guess, is just the romance genre, where it's like, it's not about big problem to solve. It's about how do these pieces fit together.
Right, in every sense of the word there.
Thank you for that.
Hey, if it's there, I'll make a joke out of it.
Yeah.
But I hear what you're saying. One of my first examples that I ever ran into, I was probably a little too young to read this, but I read The Fifth Sacred Thing when I was 14. And I fell in love with the image of a world where people disagree. They don't always have the same priorities, but they figure it out. And they communicate well enough to talk things through instead of just stonewalling each other or fighting. And that meant a lot to me. And later, as an adult, I reread it and was able to take in more of the nuance and more of the meaning. But at the time, it was just an image of a society where nobody goes hungry and nobody's thirsty, and everybody thinks of each other. I want to live there. And yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. If I broke into your train of thought, I was just.
No, I was doing the nervous talk thing.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to go back to something that happened. I was at an event a few years ago, and somebody brought me a book to read. They brought me their young adult book to read, and we were just kind of chatting. I didn't know her or anything, but I quickly got the impression that the book was, I call them boy in a box stories. And she brought it to me because I used to work at CPS. And so I've worked with, anyone from birth to 18 who are coming into CPS from, really traumatic. And that was one of the things I did when I was with public health. And so her emphasis in this story was just how horrible this kid's life was. And it's
like
like,
a
I
child
get an
told kid.
overabundance of this. I get a lot of this, and I call it boy in the box because we literally had, in my town, somebody that put a girl in a box and left her in a box under the bed for years. And so that's kind of, when I start reading something and it starts in that kind of thing, I just kind of put it away because I know there's a lot of hopelessness in it. And when I was talking to her, I said, what I'd really like to see are healthy characters that are in bad situations. So I would like to see kids coming through CPS who, when I worked there, I wanted to see kids that were coming through and they were successful. And I know a man that did go through the system, and he became a big Wall Street financier type person. And he was always strange because he was a feral child, but he was happy. He made a successful life. And so I'd like to see positivity, especially in the young adult books.
Yes. I think sometimes people get into a little too much suffering Olympics. Like if I make things really, really bad for my characters, then people will care. It's like,
well, that becomes the plot of the story. And,
yeah.
It just seems like there should be some other conflict. There should be some other plot direction.
Yeah, unless the book is trying to showcase like a type of suffering that is being ignored, like the old book, The Jungle. Just showcasing suffering for the sake of suffering. No, thank you. There's a reason I don't watch things like Saw. That I don't need it. The world has enough of that to offer. So I look for books like Fiction River has a book called How to Save the World, and it's an anthology of sort of scrappy fixing stories. Everything from a woman who figures out how to make a call center not a miserable place to work, to somebody who figures out how to use the old Aztec technology of floating islands in a climate change situation to create fertile land as her community is running out of food and they're running out of fertility in their area. So Heather just said I didn't see the link. So Heather, that link just went up again. So you should be able to see it now. And for everyone watching, feel free to get on the document that I just posted a link to and add your own hopeful books or browse through and look at what's there. There's a section for fiction, for anthologies, and for nonfiction. And I've actually been kind of on a nonfiction kick as I'm trying to figure out how my books are going to evolve. I've been reading things like Rutger Bregman has a book. Oh gods, of course now I'll forget what it's named, so let me check it.
I just want to applaud you for being able to read right now. I've talked to a lot of writers who are really struggling to figure out like how they spend their time and focus in the midst of just, the situation, the chaos, right?
Reading is what keeps me sane.
Yeah, this is a personality quirk of mine. I hyper-focus when I'm nervous or upset. I hyper-focus on what can I create, what can I do, what can I learn, and it's one of my coping mechanisms. And it's funny that you say that because my co-writer, Nonir, they do the opposite. They start consuming more media, comfort food media. And when we were learning to write together, we would sometimes butt heads because I was like, I need to get away from the world right now. Can we dive deep into storytelling for a while? And they would look at me and go, dude, I have no spoons. I have nothing. I can't write right now. And I'd be like, oh shit, okay, sorry. So I had to learn to like ease off, but it means that I have a million projects going at all times so that I can switch from one thing to another. So I let myself get off topic. Utopia for Realists, How We Can Get There by Rutger Bregman. It's a really nice example of how culture has changed in the past and could change in the future. And that's on the list. So I've been doing a lot of positive nonfiction reading. The only one I might take off the list is I have The Better Angels of Our Nature on there. It is a good book. Oh my gods, is it dry? Oh my gods. Getting through it is just like, Are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? So fair warning. What are you guys reading that gives you hope?
My escape reading, okay, I do write dystopian, and I actually write hopeful dystopians. So, you know, I was thinking along that line. But my escape reading tends to be historical romances, very fluff. No, I shouldn't say it's all that fluffy. It's just, to me, that's a total fantasy. And
Yeah, I know what you mean, because the problems are over. Those
Yeah.
problems are over.
well, you know, they're problems, you know, they haven't gotten here yet.
Right.
So, and I know, you know, generally where it's going to go from that. That's kind of my escape reading. And I think, like everybody, I actually got hit by this a little earlier because a friend died of COVID
Oh.
in January. So we knew something was wrong. You know, we knew something in the community was wrong because our ERs were like packed to the gills, and they didn't know what was wrong with these people, and they were dying, you know, of COVID. And so that hit us at, you know, at about I don't know, the end of January or so. And so you know, for myself, I've been doing non-reading stuff. I mean, it's like, hey, I think I'm going to learn to make sourdough bread along with the rest of the world.
And protest signs.
I haven't made any protest signs, and I live in an area that it's not really a good idea. It takes a very brave person to go out and protest, and so, you know, when I do, I usually go to Sacramento, gee, where it's safer. But
Right.
you know, I did, you know, I was involved, like, observing the creation of a Black Lives Matter protest here, and a friend organized it, and then it got shut down, and it was like, you know, this is the Black community, and we're shutting them down. And then they held another one, you know, that was primarily a bunch of white high school kids that organized it, and that went well and everything. And the militia people were there and everything, and they didn't bother them. And so, you know, I've been kind of caught up in that whole thing. And you have to find a balance, because otherwise you don't sleep anymore. You just...
Yeah, I hear that. Alex, what's helping you get to sleep at night?
I've actually been reading a lot of young adult and even middle grade fiction. I have a sort of list of things that I call things that I wish I'd had when I was a kid. Because, I mean, I grew up in a time when there were no LGBTQ characters in anything. And there wasn't even, where I grew up, there wasn't even a language for like transgender or non-binary. I mean, I didn't have those concepts. And
Yeah.
the fact that now there is fiction for young people and kids with non-binary characters and trans characters living, you know, happy lives.
Yes.
To me, that's very, you know, that's very hopeful. And so I just read a book called, and I'm going to forget all the authors' names, but I read a book called Zenobia July, which is a middle grade book about a trans girl, and Symptoms of Being Human, which is about a non-binary character.
Oh, what a great title.
Yeah. And so that's what I've been reading, because, I mean, it's not futuristic, but to my inner child, it's, you know, it's a future that they couldn't have imagined. And so,
right. And it sort of soothes your inner child, maybe?
Yes. And so that's what's been, you know, that's what I've been escaping into.
Awesome. Cody, how about you?
You know, I was just thinking of this young adult. It's a debut novel that just came out about a month ago. So like right in the middle of coronavirus, you know, like maybe a couple weeks into the lockdown or more. Time's getting weird right now. But it's called The Goddess Twins by Odessa Williams. And it's a sort of fantasy about young Black girl twins who discover their powers and go on a journey to like find their family. And it was just so, I mean, uplifting in a way to see that representation and to see those characters, and just, it felt so of a new era.
Yeah, like the world is being reborn.
Yeah, and Odessa, I had the chance to talk to her. She's a Black queer burner. So she took a lot of like kind of her experience as a Burning Man and incorporated them in terms of how she looks at the world. Anyway, I love that book because it felt like this is the type of title that we need more of right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, and talking about the world being reborn, one of my comfort watches right now has been Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts, because technically it's a dystopian, but the attitude of all the characters is just scrappy good humor. Like, yeah, this is our world, and it's kind of a mess, and you kind of kick stuff over to find stuff you need, but I like it. And just the juxtaposition of the old world being ruined and the kids of the new world kind of going, I don't care, we're good. I love that, because there's no angsting about, oh, the old world is gone. It's just, yeah, check out this piece of junk I found. Probably old world stuff. I love it. I adore the attitude of it. It's a little goofy, but I think we need that idea that you can stand in the ruins and still grin.
Yeah.
If you have support and if you have a community. Yeah.
And I think, and maybe this is a good time for it, but I think the answers are going to come from new things.
Yes.
Like the habits, patterns, technologies, ways of living that have served us thus far poorly are not the ones that are going to take us forward. And so it's like, if it's going to be uncomfortable because new things are uncomfortable, but those are the things that we need to look for.
Right. And I think as storytellers, part of our work is to show the way. How do we go forward? How do we do that? And how do we live happy lives? I liked what you were saying, Alex, and it's something that Nonir and I really try to work towards, showcasing that people who are outside what people used to think were traditional bounds can live happy, fulfilled lives. In our series, we start book one with a young commander, Aiden Headley, being assigned to this famous resistance base, but they have basically pranked 3 commanders in a row until these guys asked for transfers and left the base. And they said, okay, if you don't make them work, we're disbanding them. Yes, they did amazing things for 25 years, but they're too much of a hassle. We're disbanding them if they wreck you too. So that's a situation he steps into. Well, he's a young trans guy and he's not from a supportive background. But this base shows him, once they get to know him, he becomes the heart of their little community. And we really enjoy showcasing, that support, that mutual support of everyone in the community, and showcasing, times can be hard, but if you support one another, if you take care of one another, you can get through just about anything. And as long as you have that community at your back, you will survive and thrive. But we have to take care of each other first and trust each other with our truths and our hearts. And that's hard work.
I just, speaking of like total comfort watches, I just finished binging Noelle Stevenson's remake of She-Ra.
Yes.
That is such a wonderful world where LGBTQ characters are centered. And, it's got darkness in it and it's got struggle, but like even the worst villains in the world get people's pronouns right.
Yeah. And their way of attacking is not to attack your gender identity. They've got other things to do, which was nice to see.
I found that a very hopeful kind of uplifting experience. Yeah.
Well, and I bumped into another one of those grinning on top of the ruins sorts of books through queer sci-fi. It's the Road to Nowhere series. And not all of it is hopeful, but it is very uplifting. I'm a sucker for poetry, fair warning. And so it's very lyrical, very poetic. And so it's this generation by generation going through, the old world has fallen apart, and this is how a new world is coming in, generation by generation. So you get the book of the midwife, and then the book of Edda, and then the book of Flora. And I actually got handed the book of Flora, and I was like, this is amazing, and what a rich backstory. And then I realized I was on book 3. I finished the series before, or I finished the book before I realized there's 2 other books before this. No wonder it feels like a rich, alive world. So we've got about 20 minutes, and we've got some questions, so we probably waffled a bit. So let's take a look at those questions. Opal is asking, I'm a middle school teacher and I'm always connecting kids to books. In the last 10 years, I've had an increasing number of kids looking for queer stories, so I'm happy to see how many more there are being published. Talking with my students, they're very idealistic and looking for a way to make a difference in the world. Are there stories like that out there? And Opal, yes, there are. I can definitely give you my list, but do you guys, panelists, do you want to comment first on what you would give to a middle schooler who's looking to read different stuff and make a difference?
I haven't read it, but I've heard really good things about Not Your Sidekick.
That is a fun
C.B.
one.
Lee.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned earlier Zenobia July. That's just a wonderful book. I would give that to anybody.
Yes, I've heard good things about that one.
Yep.
I would recommend, if they're kind of ready for it, there's a great podcast called Outrage and Optimism, which goes through the history and current events through an ecological change mindset. Might be a little too old for middle school kids, excuse me. But let's see. Well, I can definitely recommend Tripping Over You, which is about coming into your own and claiming your power. Actually, I will recommend The Tea Dragon Society, which centers on queer characters and simply showcases them as people. And it's just such a comforting, lovable read. It really is good. I will continue this list on the Facebook group, Opal, because I'll eat up too much time if I try to list off everything I'm thinking right now. So Heather is asking, is hope punk or solar punk harder to write because reality is making it harder to believe things can get better?
Good question.
Oh.
So maybe I can jump in. I mentioned this before, but like I write dark stuff. Like the character is at the center of my Resonant Earth series, has a mental illness and he questions, like, is what he's experiencing going on in his head or is it going on in the world? So he feels like the whole world's gaslighting him to some extent. And I thought of it as a pretty dark story, but the way that the world has gone over these past few years, it's become more and more seeming in that light to be a lighter story. And it's just, reinforces the idea that like the context for when people are reading something changes how they look at it. And so I saw this long list of books, and there are so many entries here by Kim Stanley Robinson, who I've been reading since I was a teenager. And it makes me want to go back and read them all again to maybe appreciate it on another level now that I've got, so many years as an adult. But just to think about that hope comes not because there's no struggle or conflict, but because people are focused on a vision of a solution rather than a vision of a problem.
Yes.
That's the way to put it.
That's exactly my own mindset. But Alex, if you want to go next, and then we'll just go around the circle.
Well, I think about what drew me to science fiction when I was young. And it seems like in an older generation of science fiction, there was always this idea that the future was exciting and that it was hopeful. And there would be problems and there would still be struggles, but we could find solutions to them, and we would have a future.
Yeah.
and that's still what I look for, you know, in speculative fiction. I've never really been a fan of dystopias, because, you know, it seems to me that whether it's in your personal life or in the wider world, there has to be at least a sliver of hope that things
Mhm.
can get better.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's like the first requirement of any
Yeah.
kind of recovery.
Yeah, because if you can't see any light, well, then what's the point? But for me, it's actually easier to write hope punk because I need it. I'm the type of person where if you drop me down a hole, I'll start looking for the light at the top, and then I'll look for a shovel. That's just my survival mechanism. I'm like, okay, this is where I am, fine, let's get out. And when Nonir and I decided to write the series Aces High, Jokers Wild that we do, our whole premise was, it was 2016 and all of our friends had gotten nihilistic and everybody was like, we're fucked, we're fucked, we're fucked. Excuse my language. And my reaction was a sort of fierce frustration and a resistance to that. It was, fine, we're going to write the darkest world we can think of, barring or the darkest version of America we could think of, barring a nuclear war. Because frankly, when you hit nuclear war level, it's just survive till tomorrow. There's no point to me at that point. But the darkest dystopia, and then we are going to write our way out of it.
Love
and
that.
into light again. And that was the whole point of what we wanted to do, was we're going to start at the very bottom that we could picture and show how we take care of each other in the dark and work our way back towards the light. Because we wanted to show people, yeah, it might get worse than this. It might get really, really bad, but we'll find our way back out one day. And so that was what I needed to write, because that is what I need to believe. And I hope to pass that on to others. And I needed to show how we cope. Like Aiden suffers from anxiety depression complex, and so I show him talking to his AI, which acts as a daily wellness mental health coach. And we show breathing exercises. We show all these tricks for how to cope with this extremely stressful life. And people will turn to each other and say, you do your exercises this morning, just in a very casual way. Hey, you take your meds? And showcasing, you know, yeah, it sucks, but if we take care of each other, we'll get through this. Sorry, Belinda, I didn't mean to take all your time.
No, I'm listening. I'm fascinated. I've actually not really heard the term hope punk or solar punk before, but it sounds familiar. I do, like I said, I write dystopian. Sometimes I write very dark. Sometimes I write very hopeful. And one of my first published books was a series called Imperative, and it's set in a futuristic California post something horrible happening, which I never go into because they've pretty much fixed things. So they travel in, you know, magnetic cars that have no impact on the environment. You know, they recycle, they make their homes out of, you know, local materials and that sort of thing. And to me, they figured it out. You know, they figured it out. But then I'll switch to something else like the Black Planet series, which it's a very regional dark moment. It's San Francisco Bay Area, and so San Francisco has had an earthquake that devastated it. And so I built a culture that grew up down on Fisherman's Wharf that I based off of, like the walled city, you know, where it's very insular and it's scary and everything, and it's dark, but it's safe to them. And again, they're fixing things, they're figuring it out. And I think my inspiration, you know, we all know this is kind of a bad time right now. And
Understatement.
Look at me, I'm sitting in the sun because it's going to be 110 degrees in a couple of days. And I'm just like, I'm sitting outside in the sun. so that we can cut down a little electricity use and that kind of thing, you know. So we're kind of all up here, we're kind of going, this is going to be a desert at some point, you know, so we've either got to run away or we've got to cope or we've got to fix it. And
I know exactly what you mean. I live in Colorado, and my stuff is set in a future Colorado, and I'm trained in horticulture, so I'm drawing all the plants from Arizona and New Mexico. I describe the landscape because I'm like, yeah, it's hitting 110, it's hitting 112. I mean, I work outdoors all the time, so I'm out in that, and I'm like, yeah, if we regularly hit 114 out here, we're not going to grow anything but chaparral at some point. And all the cottonwoods are going to die.
Yeah, we've been in.
Might not be a bad thing.
You know, we've been in these multi-year droughts. You know, 7-8 year droughts. Actually, we're still in a drought in spite of how green it is behind me.
Yeah, same here.
We went through the car fire. You know, we're right now packing our go bags and organizing our dogs and everything so that when it happens again, so, you know, we can get out. But the thing that kind of gives me hope is, you know, not only just like adapting, but I see this is the reddest area of California, and they're crazy red. And these are people that are digging up their lawns, and they're putting in sustainable, drought tolerant landscaping.
About damn time.
Yeah, I may not agree with them and everything, a lot of stuff, but they're adapting. And they've been screaming about wearing masks. And the day that Governor Newsom said you have to wear the masks, the next day they're wearing their masks and they're not complaining that much anymore. And so I'm seeing behavioral changes, you know, as we're adapting not just to like COVID, but we're also adapting to our weather change. People are starting to switch to, you know, battery operated cars a lot more. I mean, I think we actually have charging stations in town now. And so I'm seeing behavioral change in unexpected people. And so that gives me hope when, you know, it actually gives me material to pull from when I'm writing. You know, the fact that we are not just learning to cope, but we're also trying to fight back to some degree.
Yeah.
It's, you know, so that's kind of my free association thing with this whole thing.
Oh yeah, totally. And I hear you. I mean, I'm writing about Colorado, and I'm writing about my neighborhood, which is sometimes fun because I get to burn down the Alpo dog food center at one point, which is, you get to do things with your hometown that you shouldn't do, but it's fun. But at the same time, I'm describing what I'm afraid of, which is it's not even just global warming, it's climate weirding, that we are getting cold snaps. One of the most dangerous things is that we're getting cold snaps that sweep in. We'll have weeks and weeks of 70 degrees, and then all of a sudden 15 degrees. And all the non-native.
What's that do to like food crops?
Yeah, it kills a lot of crops.
Yes.
And it's just vicious stuff. And when you live out in it, when you are in my line of work and work out in it, you look around and go, God damn, we can't handle any more of these. Yeah. We've lost a lot of the trees in town over about 10 years of intermittent deep freezes in the middle of mid-spring. I mean, it's middle of April and it hit 15 degrees and you're looking at it going, well, no wonder the tree's dead. Of course it couldn't survive that. That's not normal. But now it is. And now the only things that are surviving are going to be able to cope with that. So we only have about 10 minutes left. But I wanted to ask you guys, are you techno-optimists, or are you techno-realists, or are you techno-pessimists? And by that, I mean, I tend to have a techno-realist approach that it's human choices and behavior that'll fix things, not some new technology we come up with. So you can have all these wonderful new technologies, but if the ground state of the society, I guess is the best way to put it, is how much can I make out of you, is exploitive, then all the great technologies in the world aren't going to fix the system. People will still be starving. What do you guys think?
I don't know what you call it, but I look at everybody, like I said, making bread, learning to make bread, learning to grow gardens. My son-in-law is part Native American. He grew up on a Hupa reservation, and he's like,
Oh, nice.
yeah, we're gonna get ourselves some horses down the road here because we're gonna need them.
Right.
So I see a return to basics. You know, I don't think the internet's going to go away or anything like that, but I think that we're learning to get back in touch with our food and where it comes from and different ways of transportation and stuff.
Time to get more local again.
Yeah.
I hear that. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think it's, oh, go ahead, Alex.
Go ahead. I guess that I would have to say that I'm a techno optimist. I mean, I grew up in the era of the original Star Trek and the future that I dreamed up was a future of space travel and people, living, exploring the solar system and I still, that's still the kind of future I dream of. I mean, I don't think technology magically solves the problems, but I think it gives you the tools to solve.
Agreed.
I mean, I think the internet, for instance, for all the, for all the negative things that we see about it, it also gives people the tools to do, like, as a small, just as a small example, this, what we're doing right now.
And in some ways it did liberate us because it lets you actually point at a comment that Weird Uncle Ben made and say, see, read this, instead of just Weird Uncle Ben is weird.
And so I think it gives us the tools, and then we have to use them.
Yeah, along that line, it's like I have a friend in Russia, and she lives in the Ural Mountains, and because of the internet and Google Translate, we can talk, we can have conversations.
Yeah.
And a move that's happening in Russia right now is people are fleeing to the country. They're getting out of the cities. And that's what she's doing is she has a piece of property and she's building her own house and she's trying to figure out how to keep rain during the summertime water during the summertime so she can grow her crops. She has chickens, she's using technology to get back to the basics. And that's what, there's big groups of people in Russia. They're just like, we got to get out of here. And that's what they're doing.
Along those lines, I want to throw this out as kind of a hopeful thing. I'm Menominee Irish, and I grew up on the Kishena Reservation up in Upper Wisconsin. Well, up there we have a big festival called the Wild Rice Festival. This year it's canceled, and that's like canceling the sun rising. It's like, what? You can't cancel the Wild Rice Festival. How? So it's thrown everybody off pretty heavily. So the great thing though is that the younger generation is saying, okay, we'll still get into our regalia, we'll still get into our fancy dance, and we'll dance in our driveways and in our living rooms, and the drumming guys, they will drum each in their own living rooms, and we'll combine the sounds, and we'll do an online montage of the dance for the wild rice. And they're still going to have, because normally the community would get together and do a ceremony and everybody would be dancing around the ceremonial, the celebrants is, I guess, the best word in English. Well, we can't do that. The celebrants are going out by themselves, but everybody is going to dance online and watch the celebrants. So we still feel like we're a people. And that's kind of amazing that we have been able to do that.
Yeah.
So there is power in the technology. Sorry, Cody, you go ahead.
I just think we've been living through an ongoing uprising for Black Lives Matter, which is powered by the ability of people to see what each other are doing, to organize, and to kind of come together in a very non-hierarchical way in support of the cause. So, I think new technologies create new problems, which are very scary. And there's a lag time because usually institutions are better adept at those technologies at first. Right. But when when, you know, the learning curve among the greater populace goes up and we all now know how to use our smartphone, computer, Star Trek magic boxes that we carry everywhere, we can make great things happen. And that's what's, I think, happening now out in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and we can make things happen in new directions, because when it's all top down, then only one type of innovation happens. It can happen quickly, but it only happens in one direction.
Yeah,
When
we're
you
almost
hand
seeing
this-
like collective brainstorming now on like, so how, you know, what are the solutions? And it's not, you know, I think 20, 30 years ago, it would have been like, okay, the establishment says, here are some policies we're going to enact. That's what reform is. Get behind it if you want it to happen. But what we're seeing is the people saying, what do you think? How do we do this? What are the solutions? And it's, you know, much more of a collective brainstorm.
And actually, that's the kind of community I try to write when I'm writing this, when I'm writing this resistance force. I'm writing a force where people, you know, they don't have all the guns. They're never going to beat the corporations for resources, but they can outthink them, and they can think circles around the big, slow forces. And that's what they do. That's what they focus on. So we're pretty much out of time. Do you guys want to have any last wrap-up thoughts?
I guess maybe I'll just say there's so much dark out there right now, but, you know, focus on finding that light. Like you said, that's going to be the fuel that gets you to the future.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the activism I'm seeing gives me so much hope. And, you know, it started, you know, after 2016, I found myself in a group of, you know, primarily middle-aged to older women. And they were so out there, you know, their activism. I mean, we do marches and there'd be ladies in wheelchairs waving us on and everything. And now I'm seeing these young people doing outrageous things, like the tickets today at the rally. And it's like, oh my gosh, there's hope. It really is. It really is. You know, that was exciting.
Alex, did you have any last thoughts?
I mean, I guess I tend to be an optimist in the long run, and I think something that helps is having a historical perspective to realize, you know, we've been through dark times before, and that doesn't necessarily make it any less horrible for the people that are going through it right now, but it does, you know, it does teach us that dark times don't last, and that you can win.
Yeah. So yeah, we're in the dark, but each of us is a candle. So we just need to stay lit.
Stay lit, everybody.